So that's just who I am. And I say, Kathy Shimin, who's one of the senior training consultants at the Directorate of Social Change, she's also going to be assisting with the Q&A session. So really the format I just want to explain with this session is that I say roughly 3/4 of an hour, 45 minutes, same thing, whichever money you're working in. I'm going to be sharing some slides and some information all about the fundraising plan. And then we're going to go into a Q&A session. So obviously you might want to put questions in now. You can start doing that straight away if you want to, but bear in mind we might actually during the session answer some of those. So feel free to put them in, but obviously Kathy's going to be filtering those. And she's also ably assisted by George as well from the DSC this morning, because we've got a lot of people on, which is absolutely fabulous that we're all together as a community, united by ecclesiastical and the Directory of Social Change. If you can't stay to the end, because you say we're going to be on air until midday, I know tummies might start to rumble, but you say if you have to go before then, please again go to Ecclesiastical's website. You'll be able to download the recording of the whole session as well. But also it's chance to book, and I'll remind you at the end, but we've got 3 more sessions coming up in 2021. And as it's V-Day today, the start of the vaccination programme is 2021, there's lots to look forward to. More sessions like this, but also the chance of a vaccination, but also a great opportunity to really bounce your fundraising into a new sphere. And let's hope some of the information I'm able to share with you today and then help through the question and answer session will actually put you in a better place and your charity in a better place to actually generate more money so that your charity can do the things that it's there to do and help the people and situations that you're aiming to do. So let's move on and see what we're going to be covering. Today we're going to be looking really at some prime areas around the fundraising plan. We're going to start with some basic principles and then think about the importance of actually having a plan. Going to think about some of the pre-planning elements and then what are the components of the plan. Then we'll move in to that question and answer session. The next session in January is actually about fundraising sources. So that's why if you're then thinking we're going to be talking about those, don't think we've missed out something obvious because we're going to be spending a whole session on the 13th of January. It's all right, it's a Wednesday and we're not at all superstitious. It's actually my nephew's birthday as well. So anyway, we're going to be coming back to the sources then. But today is all about the principle of planning and what you need to do within your fundraising plan to give you that firm foundation so that then when you start your fundraising, you're actually not going to start crumbling. So let's just think about first things first. So before we even start on our fundraising plan, we need to do some preliminary things. So are we clear about how much is needed, how much you actually need to raise? What's the actual issue you're trying to overcome? I always say if there's no problem, there's no point raising money. And in a way, donors, funders, supporters, they want to know what is the situation that's far from ideal as a way to actually donate or support you by generating funds or giving you gifts in kind or whatever. All of those things, it's about helping overcome a situation that's far from ideal. And then the key thing then is what difference will a donor's support make? What will it actually achieve? So we can't start fundraising until we know these things, and we can't actually start thinking about our plan until these elements are actually covered. And what I like to do is use that lovely sort of Rudyard Kipling's poem from 1902 and the Just So stories. I had 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I know. Their names are what and why and when, and how and what and who. In a way, that's what you need to establish first of all. Who are you helping? What are you going to do? Why are you going to do it? Where is that going to happen? When and how? So those are some of those key component parts. And also looking at your budgets now, because again, lots of us as charities over these last few months, the last 9 months since the pandemic hit back in March, You know, many charities have changed the way they're delivering services. Some, unfortunately, it's costing more money, but others, it's actually costing less. So in a way, when you're starting to think about your fundraising plan, you want to know how much money is needed, what you want to achieve in terms of income generation, and just actually understand if that is different than possibly what it was, you know, possibly even 12 months ago, because of the way that you've changed your services. So again, I said a couple of basic principles. So successful fundraising, it's about a two-way relationship. We need to understand our potential donors' motivations. That's our donors, our supporters, our funders, whatever term you want to give it, but the people who are going to be helping you, the people you're going to be targeting, the people you're asking for support. So it's so vital that we actually understand what is it that they're looking from getting involved with you. It might be, you say, they just want to know that they are doing something to make a difference, to bring change about, that they are supporting someone who is at the front of their services. They are the best people to be doing this work. They want to know, I say, that their money is going to make a difference, but also what are they getting back from it? Sometimes it's a tangible thing. You're thinking about retail, you're thinking about Christmas cards, especially at the moment. People are perhaps wanting to support a charity by buying Christmas cards, but what are they wanting back at the moment? They're wanting something quite tangible. So again, we need to understand our potential donors' motivations. And this is all because at the end of the day, satisfied donors will give again, give at a higher level, and will encourage others to do so. There's a lot of talk around about the supporter experience, but over the years we've called it all sorts of different things. Some of you might be very aware of the phrase stewardship or donor journey or supporter journey, but basically it's what we shouldn't be doing in fundraising is treating our donor, our supporter, our funder as an ATM machine and just going to them when we want some money or some support and for them to do something for us. We need to actually be having a two-way relationship and thinking exactly what is it that they're looking out of that relationship. And if it's possible, and so long as it's legal and moral as well, just joking, then we need to actually make sure that we're able to give it them so they are satisfied supporters and they go on. So it might be having fun at an event. It's about feeling part of a community. There's lots of different things, and I'm sure you're busy thinking about what are some of the motivations of the people and organisations who are involved with you. So let's say start thinking about that fundraising plan. Now, I often like to think of a fundraising plan as a roadmap, but I'm sure many of you out there, the thing up in the top right-hand corner, you say the Collins 2021 roadmap is something that you're not actually asking Santa to deliver it in your stocking. With the advent of sat nav, you know, many people no longer have a route map in their car, a map book. But I still do. Before this, I used to travel widely, and there's many a time, even though I've got the postcode plugged in, there's a road closed, or as similar time to this last year, I know I was going up to see relatives up in the northeast and had to divert. The A1 was flooded, and I ended up driving all around Sherwood Forest and different bits. And I can tell you now, if I'd followed the official diversion, we'd have been even later getting to my in-laws than we were. But because we actually dug out that route map, we're actually saying, no, we'll not follow diversion signs. I've worked out a route. Fortunately, there was two of us in the car. So really, that is what our fundraising map is, our fundraising plan is. It's our route map to take us from where we are now to where we actually want to be. And if we don't have a plan, we won't fulfill our objectives. We won't necessarily use our resources as widely as possible. We won't be able to achieve our fundraising goals. And as a result of that, we won't be able to provide the much needed services or facilities that our beneficiaries or our client group are actually desperately in need of. So I say, having a fundraising plan, it keeps us on track. It helps us to achieve those goals and objectives. And for many of you out there, it's the perfect excuse to say no. So when somebody walks into the office and says, or contacts you via a phone call or on a Zoom call, says, have you thought about, do you know what? This is going to give you that perfect excuse rather than thinking, silly twit, they've no idea what we're on about. You can actually just say, that's a really good thought, but it's not in our plan. Now, I do actually normally emphasize is that a plan is a guide, and we do need to be flexible along the way. It may be things are going better than we expected, so we can add some extra things in, or it's our monitoring tool to actually help us to understand if we're on track to achieve things. And if things aren't going as well as we hope, then perhaps we need to factor in some other things and review things. But perhaps to that person who's got they think they've got all the answers and says, have you thought about, then you can use it to say, well, actually, we spent some time developing our fundraising plan, and that wasn't one of the essential components. So it definitely gives the wider organisation, definitely your trustees, the confidence that you are on track and you know what you're doing. You're not just sort of turning up one day and saying, oh, I feel like doing this today, but they can see that you say you've got a well laid out thought process that's then documented. And I think that's the other thing, it's documented because you say it could well be, and I'm going to think really positive, you win the lottery and you decide, you say, to go off and sort of so explore life up in the Highlands and leave your charity. So you say that's the important part is having it written down so other people can see. But also many funders will actually ask, can we see your fundraising plan? Because that gives them confidence that you as an organisation are here for the long term, that you're not just asking them for part of a fund, but you don't know how the rest of that money is going to actually be coming in. So it really is absolutely vital, and I can't stress just how important it is. So definitely not having a plan, you end up a bit like this, running around like a headless chicken. Permission to run around like a headless chicken is definitely denied. So many times when I say and go into charities that have asked me to help them, and I say, where's your plan? And they actually say, oh, Jill, we've not time for that. We just got cracking. Well, it is definitely short-sighted. It is that investment for the future. If you don't have a plan, it will in the end take you longer to get where you want to be. And you won't necessarily have those joined up elements so that one thing you're doing now is leading to something that you're intending doing later on. So it's seeing it from definitely the short term, but also the long term perspective as well. So it's something then to have you, to help you to be much more effective. So as we start, we need to think, where are we now? An important sort of element is that snapshot. Where are we now? So it definitely applies to both our funding and our sources, but also the methods that we're using and the results that we're actually getting. Are we getting more money from some of the sources? And I know some of you out there saying, Jill, be realistic. We're not getting more money, we're getting less money. But some of you, and there was some lovely stuff on the news this morning about some charities who are doing really well, and the fabulous story about the Leeds Rhinos and what they've been doing. That lovely captain, Kevin, who was hoping to raise 77,700 and whatever to support his colleague who has motor neuron disease. And it's when I last heard it had actually hit 1.8 million. So I know Motor Neuron Disease Association is obviously going to be thinking very carefully about what they're going to do with that money. But they've actually, I should imagine, exceeded their fundraising targets. But it doesn't mean that more money isn't needed. Because it's to find a research into the cause and the cure for motor neuron disease is definitely high up on many people's lists. And again, we've loads of people out there this morning. Your organisations are doing just as incredible work. So don't think you say just because it's medical research, but whatever your organisation, you wouldn't exist if there wasn't a need for you to be there to be solving a problem. So you say, think about where you are now as part of planning for the future. So what about the resources as well that you've got and to generate the income? What about the skills, knowledge and experience that people in the organisation already have? Or are you starting to see you've got some gaps? Maybe people have left, or again, you've already started to change some of your fundraising tactics and you've not necessarily got the right skills to help you with those. But also, as I mentioned before, importantly, think about your organisational funding needs. Have these changed? Have they increased? Have they decreased? Or are they the same, but you're delivering your services in a different way? So do you need more or less cash than you thought at the start of your financial year? So key components with that planning process. So that now, where are we now? Where do we want to be? And then how are we actually going to get there? So these are our three basic components of our fundraising plan. So when we're thinking about where do we want to be, that's when we actually use that to form the objectives that form the basis of our fundraising plan. Now, for many of you, you're just saying, well, the main objective, Jill, it's about raising more money. Well, that's an aim, but in terms of that planning process, we have overall aims, and then we need to break those down into more specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timed. I'm a big fan of SMART objectives. I'll give you a warning. Some of the other things you're now going to see, they're not SMART objectives. They're a little bit more of developments, but they're still aims, and you will need to flesh these out for these to become SMART objectives. So, what do you want to do in terms of raising money? Do you want to retain more of your current supporters? So that might be an objective that you build around that. Do you want to increase the value of your donations and grants coming in? Do you want to diversify your income streams? I'm sure for lots of you, where possibly you've got all of your eggs in one or two baskets, that is something you're looking to do. So these are still aims, and within your plan, you'll need to develop them into SMART objectives. It might be you want to innovate and try some new fundraising techniques, and lots of charities at the moment are actually doing that. And again, if you were in on the last webinar, we actually sort of gave some research around the number of charities who were willing to try, or the number of charities who had tried and seen it was successful. So again, you might want to look up that last webinar if you weren't able to catch it. So then when we're looking at our fundraising mix, we want that mixed portfolio. So we want a number of baskets and a number of eggs in it. But again, what we're looking to do, though, is actually have low risk income streams. Now, fundraising is a risk area. We can never say we can do this and it will generate a certain amount. It's not like making a cake. And some of you might say, well, even though I follow the recipe, it still doesn't turn out right. And if some of you have watched Bake Off, and I loved, Joe Brown's The Extra Slice, and the photos that people would send in, they'd have a lovely image of a cake they were hoping to make, and then they shared the result. I'm thinking, oh goodness, and they might have followed the instructions. So this is it. So fundraising is definitely, you can't guarantee, but what we look to do is definitely within our portfolio of fundraising activities is try and be fairly low risk, because what we're doing as fundraisers and fundraising departments and fundraising teams, we invest in money that people have given to provide the services. We're diverting, and it's a legal thing. We're allowed to do it. The Charity Commission is totally, the Bond of Trust says we can spend some of that money on fundraising, as long as it wasn't restricted income to do something quite specific. We're allowed to do it, but we do want to see a return on it. Now, I know the interest rates at the moment at the banks and building societies are pretty naff. So, you almost, do I just put the money under the bed? No, definitely not. But we need to invest money wisely, and we need to invest in our fundraising wisely. So when we're considering the elements that we're going to get involved with within our fundraising plan, we need to think about the risk. Nothing, as I've mentioned, is risk-free, but we need to look to see, is it fairly low risk with just the odd thing as higher risk. We need to check out, is it cost effective? Is it cost efficient? So what is the return on investment that we're going to get? And overall, a whole fundraising for an organisation, you're really looking at somewhere between, for every pound you spend, you're looking to get £4 to £5 back in return. That is what most charities are looking to do. There may be a time when you're investing in some new activities or some new systems or processes. You might just be investing in a new database. So perhaps this year you'll be a little bit lower, but that is what is the acceptable norm across the voluntary sector. So when you're looking at your activities, you've got to decide, is it acceptable to your organisation? Now, I work widely across the whole voluntary and community sector, and I love the variety of working in different parts of the sector. So 1 minute might be working with an animal welfare charity, to working in the arts and culture and heritage, to working in conservation or whatever. But I actually do work quite a lot within the hospice world as well. And I definitely, you say, one of the things, if you said, oh, let's have some clairvoyance evenings, I don't think that's going to be acceptable to the organisation, just to give you a daft example, but just to get you thinking, what is acceptable to your organisation? For some people, running your own lottery is not acceptable. You've got values, or your organisation is about helping people who've had an addiction to gambling issue. So again, it's thinking, what is acceptable within your organisation? What might be fine with one organisation isn't necessarily with another. Just got two other points. Realistic and implementation is such a key point to be thinking about, because we can come up with all these great ideas. And again, we're going to talk a lot more about that in terms of fundraising sources and the methods or tactics that we use to tap into them in our next webinar on the 13th of January. But you say, we've come up with this great plan, but if it's just you're just there on your own. Whilst we're into sort of retro fashion, 70s is very much the thing at the moment. We're not into the 80s with those great big padded shoulder pads. I know George, who's helping us from DSC, won't remember those because he wasn't born. But to say, some of you, I'm sure, on the call will remember those shoulder pads. But look, the weight of the world, you might feel it's resting on your shoulders. But again, across the organisation, other people should be involved, even if it is your overall responsibility, but other people should be playing a role. But we just need to think, what staff, what volunteers, what resources have you got? So just keep thinking about realistic in terms of its implementation. And don't whistle up this afternoon some great new thing that you can do for Christmas. There are still the odd little thing you might just pull out the bag for Christmas, but I think we're probably planning now for January, February, thinking about Valentine's Day, thinking about Pancake Day, if you're looking for events. So again, think about time. Is it realistic in terms of that implementation? What's the lead-in time? Also, when we're thinking about our different activities, what's going to bring us restricted money and what's going to bring us unrestricted money? Sometimes restricted money is, I'm going to do that awful thing of the air quotes, it is sometimes easier to raise, but sometimes it's more cost effective to raise, because you might put an application in for a grant for a very specific project. I'm just working with an international charity at the moment, and we're desperately trying to get loads and loads of grant applications out there at the moment, because they've got UK aid match funding. So for every pound that they raise, it's going to be matched. But that is all restricted. It is for a specific project, some work that's happening in Mozambique. So we need to, and hopefully that is going to be incredibly cost effective, but it will be very restricted. We as an organisations, we need unrestricted income as well. It gives us the freedom to do new things. It gives us a chance to top up things. And my normal quote is, it says, we need the toilet rolls and the chocolate biscuits in our charities. Now, if you're not going into the office, perhaps they're not needed as much, but we definitely still need unrestricted income that's coming in to your charity. So to help us be sustainable, we need a fundraising plan that has that mixed portfolio of sources and different methods and techniques to actually tap into those. And as I say, that is going to be the subject of our next webinar on the 12th. Sorry, not the 12th, on the 13th of January. So what we're looking for within our fundraising plan as well, we need to look for some quick wins. So things that will generate money very quickly in the short term. I don't know what the deadline is, Ranga, she never told us that, but perhaps that is definitely one of those quick wins. Apply for that ecclesiastical £1,000 grant as part of the 12 days of Christmas. But also we want some long-term gains. And if we don't start doing something about them now, we're moving to the future, the time when we'll start to reap the benefits. So again, unless you're a close to death charity, you won't see any results, hopefully in some ways because of the people involved. You won't see any results possibly from starting a new legacy programme in 2021, perhaps for 4 or 5 years. And it's not to say what you're doing is not working. It's just that people, when they get interested and motivated to perhaps include a charity in the will. It's not something they go off and do instantly, but when they do, they eventually sort of go and update their will, or make a will for the first time, or change, you say, that will and update it and include you as a charity in it. But on the whole, they're not going to die within the next few years. I know sometimes a barrier to people making a will is they say, oh, well, once I've done it, I might die. It doesn't mean just because you don't have a will, you won't die. But, you know, the longevity of some wills can be very long. I say, unless you're a close to death charity. But unless you start promoting it, you'll never start getting other than the odd occasional one. So what we need to do, going back then, I say, looking at within our plan, we want some of those quick wins, or as I'm talking about, the low hanging fruit. So when you're considering your different opportunities, you know, start to actually look at what's the effort that we need to put into it, and what's the impact or the results of what we're going to be doing. So I definitely categorize low hanging fruit as low effort and high impact. But if it's low effort and low impact, it makes no difference. So don't bother doing it. If it's high effort and low impact, again, what's the point of spending time doing it? High effort, but high impact. Well, if you're looking for some quick wins and you need to do something, you've got limited resources just at the moment, then that might be something to actually sort of not forget about, but just hold, put in the plan and build up to it later on. So I love a matrix to actually help with that prioritization. So again, when you're considering what you're going to do, what sources you want to tap into, you might be thinking about some new areas and some new activities. So when we're doing that, this is where the Ansoff matrix is a really helpful tool to actually think about what you're going to be doing. So over here, and I think you should all be able to see the cursor. So what we're doing is an existing fundraising technique or a campaign. So something that you're already doing. And it's something that you're already doing and you've got an existing audience for it. You've got supporters who like this. Now, again, you know, it's this build up to the festive season, and many charities, you know, do a Christmas appeal. So again, yes, improve it, but this is definitely a less risky area to get involved with. So here we are, we've got an existing activity and we're doing it to an existing audience. So we want to tweak it, improve it. So we are, hopefully going to increase it a little bit as well. Over here then, we've got an existing activity, but we're going to use it to target a new audience. And again, many aims will be to actually attract new supporters. So again, it might be a technique that we know what we're doing, we're used to doing it, but we're going to target new supporters. And I think you can work out the rest of it without me taking it through. But here we've got these, and I love using a traffic light system. So here we've got our green, so that's our least risky. These are intermediate risk. And then here, this is a new technique to a new audience. I'm certainly not saying don't do it, but as it is our most risky area, is then to actually just do a few of those and plan it carefully, monitor and evaluate, so you can actually build on the success from that. Within our planning process, we need to think about the resources. Who and what do you need to be successful in terms of delivering your plan? Remember, resources aren't just a fundraiser. Again, so many times charities or trustees or even a chief exec says, we've employed a fundraiser, what else do we need? And being sort of, meaning they don't need to do anything else. But as with any other area, fundraisers need tools. If you are going to do possibly, you know, I was saying about that Christmas appeal, it might be you're wanting to do a door drop leaflet, perhaps. So you need to invest in some tools, some, leaflets, collateral to do that. Again, with lots of online activities, it is slightly cheaper. I'm going to say there's not a no cost, but it's less cost than some other areas. But again, if your traditional supporters are used to receiving a letter in the post from you, remember we were looking at doing existing things to existing supporters using existing techniques. So we don't want to suddenly try and communicate with all our 80-year-old supporters by using Twitter or other social media things. So we need to think about who do we need, what resources, and what other things we need as part of that resource package. So that leads us into the budget, which is a vital part of a plan. We need to be thinking about what is our anticipated income and what do we need to spend in order to generate that. And whilst I've not got them colour coded, I thought that might just be too much with all the colour on the screen. But when I'm actually doing budgets, I actually like to think of what's the best case scenario, what's the ambitious or definitely the optimistic view. And with a name like Jolly, I always like to be optimistic about everything, but also I sometimes need to be realistic. So I also like to think, what is the worst case? So this is our cautious or pessimistic views in terms of our income. And then I also like to think about what is the realistic income. So this is sometimes working really hard, but also with a good wind and a following already out there. So what is, you say, our best case? And I would always build a plan based on our best case, and I would share that internally with a fundraising team. But I would always stress to an organisation is work on the worst case scenario in terms of what we think is going to be generated, because in a normal year, we would hopefully have actually achieved that. And hopefully we will surpass it, a breakthrough. But as I say, at least if you're planning to be more realistic, or even at that worst case, then you're not having to cut services or different things like that. And I know it definitely wasn't part of that planning process. You say we've definitely had something quite extraordinary happening this year. But you say those just three. And so again, sometimes I even color code it. So my best case would definitely be the more dangerous one. So I definitely talk about that being red, and the green being the worst case, and the amber being the realistic. So then we need to, you say, consider as part of who's going to be involved, what are the roles and responsibilities around fundraising? And I'm a great believer that everyone across the organisation has got a role in fundraising. So obviously there's direct fundraising staff and volunteers. That's what they're there to do. It is about them doing activities that will directly generate money. But other staff and other volunteers have got a role. And again, it's about identifying what that role is. So it may be about your direct care people who are running the services, to share the stories, to share the impact, to collect data that you can then use as a fundraiser when you are perhaps putting together that Christmas appeal letter, or whether you're using it as part of a grant application. Other staff have to have an involvement in fundraising. Otherwise, you as fundraisers, if that's what your role is, either as staff or volunteers, you can't actually exist in a vacuum. It's about being part of the whole organisation, knowing what the plans are for the organisation. So again, you can start thinking about whether this is someone you approach now this year, or whether you're going to save them for next year when you've got perhaps a new project that you're hoping to start. Trustees and other advisors have also got a role to play. It may be they can actually help, with a follow-up meeting with a donor or a supporter, and that's going to give it some extra credibility. Before I was mentioning about legacies, and there's nothing more special than when someone other than a paid staff member says why they've decided to include the charity in their will. And that's a lovely thing for trustees to do. I actually think about leading from the front. If they're not prepared to do it, why will other people be prepared to do it? Just because someone says, yes, I've included you in my will, doesn't mean they've left you millions, but they might have actually left, perhaps a 20th of their estate. It might even be 100th of their estate, but you say they've actually made some provision and they've named you in their will. And that is a great example to share, that other people can lead on from that. And then donors and supporters, asking why they're doing it, using their motivations, using their case studies, and also using their networks to actually tap in to other supporters. A lot on that screen there, so I'm not going to go through it line by line, but again, definitely some of the key things to take you through. So you might want to come back to this, go back to the recording, but undertake a fundraising review, be clear on your fundraising goals and objectives. Know why you're raising money, for what and why. Understand who your current audience is, your donors, your supporters. Identify sources of funds and tactics for securing them. And they say we're talking about that next time. Look at any gaps or those opportunities for you. Estimate your fundraising income and your costs and work out the ROI and make sure that's acceptable to the organisation. Develop a timeline and for the different activities that will comprise your fundraising. So you know when you've got key activities and things won't actually clash with each other. Then you say it's about monitoring your plan whilst you implement it and then evaluate at the end of the time period so you know what's worked and what hasn't. So we've just done a very quick whistle stop through that. So I hope as a result of what I've been able to share with you very quickly this morning, we've had a short amount of time, but hopefully that's been some quality, not quantity, of time just to help think if we don't have a plan, our fundraising won't be joined up and we won't be as successful. It's that investing time now so that it will save you time, but will increase your effectiveness and hopefully reduce some of those sleepless nights as well. So thank you very much indeed. I hope that's given you some thoughts. It's perhaps confirmed some things you were already thinking about, or it's reminded you about some of the things that you've heard in the past and you just needed somebody else to, yeah, this is it. So sometimes you need to take that big deep breath and say, I can't do that today. I need to sit down and do my fundraising plan. So remember, stop running around like a headless chicken because permission is denied. You need a fundraising plan. So let's move over and as you say, we've now got to 45 minutes to actually take for question and answers. I know George has been busy and Kathy's who's going to help me out with this session. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. George and Angus aren't going to be joining us, but you say they're still there in the background. So Kathy, what have we got? I can see there's been quite a few things going into the question and answer bit, and I'm loving how people have been putting lots of things in chat as well.
Yeah, that is brilliant. We've had loads in from across the nearly 300 people here, I think. So we've had a number of questions. I'm going to give you, I think, Jill, a couple of quick fire ones, because you might say, do you know what, that's a massive for the January workshop, and then some that are a little bit more in depth. Is that okay? Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. So things like being UK-based charities, funding projects overseas, you know, what are the funds there and what kind of restrictions? And I think that question came up when you were talking about sources, but maybe next month.
Oh, definitely. We're just going to hold fire on that. But there are sources out there. I tell you what, though, I'm not going to do a big list of this is a grant source for this. We're just going to talk in round terms about it. But as I say, obviously, the Director of Social Change has got funds online, and there's loads of information there to actually help identify particular. But again, remember, we've heard this morning, live this morning, about those 12 days of Christmas and the ecclesiastical grant pot. There are a range of grants, and I know, again, something I was just getting finished off. We've got to submit by the 15th, and I always say that's a deadline, not a target. So our deadline was actually today to get that application in. And before I came live on air, I put a few more full stops and commas in it. So.
Okay, brilliant. And also on the point about the Directory of Social Change website, there's a kind of constantly updated COVID specific funding at the moment. So that question about overseas, I wasn't sure whether you meant specifically now what's available, and somebody said how much of that funding is actually out there at the moment. Then there was a question that was a bit more about that need we all have to build the reserves and have that unrestricted funding, and it was also tied in with funding specific roles.
And this is a really interesting one because about reserves, especially at the moment, because many charities have had to dip into them. And we often say, well, what are reserves there for? They're there for a rainy day. It seems a bit strange saying this when it's beautiful blue sky outside my window this morning and sunshine. But, you know, obviously over the last, sort of several months, we've hit that rainy day. And so charities have actually been dipping into their reserves. And that is, again, something that's been essential to help keep people afloat, to help organisations keep afloat. And that is, that's what reserves are there for. But to move forward now is about replacing those, just so that there is that buffer there again. And I think, again, we've all seen the value of reserves. So that, and again, whilst many funders don't like giving unrestricted money, many will actually realise. So when I'm talking about funders, those are grant-making organisations. Again, so often they like to fund something definite, something specific. But again, I think lots of these will be realising that many charities need that buffer back. I often think of reserves about being, again, being into biology as well. It's like cartilage. When your bone is against bone, so just think of your knee joint, you have problems and it results in arthritis where bone is against bone. But we have that cartilage in between, and really reserves are that cartilage, so that the bone isn't sort of rubbing against the bone. So I think many people and organisations will realise that you're just raising money for your organisation, and that's where unrestricted money is coming in. And I know for lots of things, it's those events that perhaps have been cancelled. But again, we might be moving things into a virtual world. So even though we might not raise as much money, we're still raising valuable, unrestricted money that will then go back into that reserves pot. We're not spending it on services. We're just making sure that the bone isn't rubbing against the bone. And then about raising money for specific posts. Now, there are some funders out there who they see the value of actually employing someone with specific responsibility for fundraising overall, or even for a specific area of fundraising. Perhaps this is it, youth wanting to do a lot more on social media in the world of virtual. You say, well, we don't have the skills internally now, we need to recruit to that. And again, that's where some funders will say you're changing. It's part of your infrastructure. So never think of it as we want a salary. Think about what that person will achieve. And then when you say, well, it's not direct services, but if you're thinking, and this is where your aim might be to generate, for every pound we spend, we want to get between 4 and 5 back. Remember I talked about our return on investment. So that is a really good investment. And again, sometimes that is where major donors perhaps, but also it could well be, say, another funder, like maybe, a corporate, an accountancy firm, rather than just giving you £10,000 to run your services, say, we'll put £10,000 towards your fundraising costs, because that £10,000, if we're looking at 4 to 5 as our return on investment, we're saying that could potentially be 50,000. And it's a bit like I was just saying with that international project I mentioned, it's a lovely ask, because we're saying for every pound you give, it can be doubled. We've just had Giving Tuesday, and that finishes today, where that was a scheme to actually double your money. So again, for some individuals and organisations, they see investing in fundraising as really sensible, because they are not just doubling their money, they might be quadrupling their money. So that makes sense. So again, it's back to how you sell it. And I make no apologies for using that word sell. It is about, fundraising is about selling. We need to talk about the features, but the benefit. The feature is having a fundraiser dedicated to this area of work. But the benefit is we're going to generate, dare I say, shed loads of cash, but no, a lot more money than we're able to.
I've quite a nice follow-on for that. Thanks. I think it's a follow-on. Tell me if I'm going off into too diverse a direction for you. It's that challenge of fundraising ongoing existing work when funders are often attracted by new initiatives.
And this again is, I've always been asked this question, Kathy, so I'm glad you actually I've picked that one out, because I know we probably got more questions in the Q&A box than we can actually deal with between us this morning. So thanks for bringing that one up. And it is a challenge. But again, that's why, again, sometimes you might have actually started with some restricted money to get a project, a piece of work off the ground. And then it's about the replacement funding. Sometimes when you apply to a funder, they'll actually say, and how they often talk about their exit strategy. What's the exit strategy? And it doesn't mean your exit strategy from doing this piece of work, but it's almost their exit. What will you do when our money runs out? Well, it may be we've solved the problem, we've done what we needed to do, but you say for many people at organisations, it's about what do we do about continuation funding? And that is really what they're saying, is how will this work continue when we're not actually funding it? So don't think about it when you're at the end of the 3 years. You need to start planning for when that money is going to be running out as to how you're going to deal with it. Now, maybe it can be absorbed into your core activities, and that gets funded from unrestricted. So always think about that. Don't necessarily look for pure restricted funding, but it may be you over the next period of time. So if you've got 3-year funding, and the problem is when you get lots of 3-year funding at the same time, you go up with your income, but then you're at the top of the precipice, and then at 3 years you drop off. So you almost want to stagger these, so you're not always trying to replace lots of funding at any one time. But as I say, think about from the initial thing, and what are we going to do to increase our sources of unrestricted income coming into the organisation? But also sometimes it's about just pivoting a little bit, thinking about, was that just phase one? Was that a pilot project? And we're now going to build on that. So maybe you can go to another funder. Some funders will give continuation money, but others you can say can apply. We've already tried this out. Again, the thing I'm doing with this overseas organisation, they've already tried it out, but we're going big with it now. It's going to really expand. So they've tried it out. So it's now going massive. And it can affect, gosh, it's amazing. It's going to affect 11,000 people in sub-Saharan Africa. It's brilliant. But sometimes we need to package it up. And very often when people or organisations say, oh, I want to give for something specific, what they're actually saying is, I know it costs you £11 million to keep your doors open and do what you're doing every day for a year. And they're saying, well, I can only give you £1,000. It feels like a drop in the ocean to that £11 million. So what I've said before about fundraisers should be selling, but fundraisers are about creativity and lateral thinking. So package it up. Again, I could share it with lots of different sorts of charities, but before I was saying is I've done quite a lot of work over the years within the hospice movement. When you think about hospice, most of their costs is salary, staff, electric bills, blah, 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 all the really boring stuff. But, package up to say, pay for the chef for December. So there's going to be some lovely festive meals. And all of a sudden, it is the salary, it's restricted, but it's what the organisation was going to pay for anyway. Make sure, you say, funds, one of the rooms in our inpatient unit, make sure that is there in January for someone. So again, instead of saying, give us something towards our £11 million running costs, boring, I don't want to fund that. But if I'm saying, can I pay for a day for a room? Can I pay for a day for a meal? Can I pay for a day's worth of drugs so people can be pain free for a day? Gosh, how emotive is that? So instead of saying, my goodness, I'm giving unrestricted money, I feel I'm doing something. My gift is worth something. And I personally, or whoever your funder, your donor is, has said, this is great what we've done. We've been able to ensure that everyone who's using that hospice service today or tomorrow or next week. So sometimes even just that concept, pay for a day, again, it's a great one to use with corporates. Pay for a day. Share that with them, what's gone on that day, what was the program, who obviously don't share names, but how many people use your services, what was achieved. Package it up, be creative. Your fundraisers out there, you can do it.
Great, thanks, Jill. Yeah, and funders want innovation, not always new initiatives, innovation within existing initiatives.
And there's lots of innovation going on at the moment.
Exactly, yeah. Well, we do it best, don't we? Our sector, we do it best.
We don't stand still, because if we stand still, we're going backwards.
Yeah. Quick things you might say, you come to this one at the end, templates, any, for fundraising plans, any templates that out of there.
Well, in a way, that slide, it was the component part of it.
For the component part of it. And a lot of people will be in this situation. We did have a plan. We had a really good plan. It's gone out the window now, though. And here's the you might not want to hang yourself on this, but how far do we plan now? What's sensible when we look at?
I think, Kathy, you're saying things that you're doing, things that I'm doing. My own plan went out the window.
Yeah.
But yes, and as I said when we were talking earlier on about the importance of a plan, you probably remember, Kathy, we were talking about that. Is as I said, it's not cast in stone. We need to be flexible, but to perhaps the person who's got that daft idea. Here in my office, I say on my bookshelf, I've definitely got the rich list. Been in many a fundraising office when somebody's walked in, when the Sunday Times produces that, it's usually at the end of April, and they walk in and say, problem solved. These are all the rich people in the country. Let's get in touch with all of them. So it gives you that chance to say no. But within fundraising, we need to keep it flexible. Yes, we've got a plan, so we know what we're intending to do, but that's why we're always monitoring it. What's working, what's not. And so I think at this point in time, we need to sort of revisit it, review it, and reforecast it. We need to think what's worked, what have we changed, what have we managed to, we might still have had, a particular activity, but instead of it being a mass participation event with perhaps 1,000 people sort of turning up to do it or even more, just think, in a way, the London Marathon, I think that's a really good example to show. We had a thought, we had a plan. The London Marathon for the last 40 years, I think, has always taken place in April, but it was the 40th anniversary marathon this year. So originally they intended to carry on, and then they realized, no, we can't, it's April, we can't have all these people running around the lot. So they had to modify their plan. And they said, right, and for many charities, that was still important. And they knew it was important to still get it within the same financial year. So they just said, we'll do this in October. Many charities are reliant on the income that comes in from this. So again, for charities, they were then making sure they supported anyone who was registered, either with their own places or the charity places. And then he said the hope was to do it in October. And so again, the planning was going on. Now, it might seem like wasted planning, but there was lots of engagement going on. So charities were keeping those supporters, those runners close to them. And again, sometimes we need to change our activities slightly. And whilst we might not be able to generate money directly, by having more engagement, we are still keeping in touch with our supporters, our donors, and our funders. So when we're ready to ask again, and whilst we're not directly generating money, all that engagement is still part of fundraising and will enable us to raise money easier and better if we just abandon all this. I find it quite horrific how so many charities actually furloughed, some whole teams just disappeared. Now, I can understand why possibly 1 or 2, but there was so much chance of engagement. And again, I'm reading lots in the sector press at the moment. And thank God, everyone's saying, we've done a lot more phone calls. People had almost got frightened of talking to people. Now, I know obviously with GDPR, have we got permission to do this? But we need to keep talking because we're keeping them engaged. We're updating them. We're letting them know what's happening. We were also generating money without even asking at that point. And I always say we've got to ask to get. But people, because they were being informed, they were being updated, they were still committed to you as a charity. Definitely charities that I was involved with, they were committed. They were getting even more committed. Gosh, I never thought you were doing this. Yes, but we've had to change our services. We're now having to do different things. So the support is almost taking those supporters with us. So that way we are sort of engaging with them, keeping those close to us. And then we'll keep reviewing our plan and seeing where we're going. So yes, we've had to change it, but the plan's not out the window. We still need our plan, but we might need to modify it. So overall, whatever your organisation has as your business plan, if that's for 3 to 5 years, then your fundraising overall strategy should be looking at that. I think if your strategy is to achieve the overall thing, but your plan is something that you're going to deliver in the next 12 months, but with an eye to your long-term strategy as to what you're going to do. So again, you're not looking, if next year, and let's just say you're going to start, you've got a calendar year, financial year, so January is that fresh start anyway. And you might have, as one of those objectives, you might have had as an overall aim to diversify our income streams. So it might be within next year's plan, you have, within the next 12 months, we will have set up a legacy program and have at least 5 pledges recorded. And that's a smart objective.
Okay, thank you, Jill. A little look at engagement internally, because there's been a few questions around that, with 2 different views really. One, when we have the fundraising team and they've got all the next best ideas and they want to do everything now. And it's not in the plan. We want to say not now. A couple of little stock phrases. Somebody said particularly that they're going to keep it in their back pocket when you give them a stock phrase for that. So that's great. Thanks. And then the other is just about, you know, that getting the whole organization involved in fundraising. How do we get people involved, and what went within the organization? We don't believe that social media funding marketing really works, and yet that whole internal getting people on board with the plan.
Oh, I love this. I love this.
I do.
And I can hear lots of you out there saying, either personally, oh, no way would I do that. Or I can see you saying, oh, the minute I suggest it, somebody, or the trustees, the senior management team, chief exec, whoever, I know they'll stop it. They'll say, I don't like that. And over the years, like I said, I've been, I know I only look like I'm in my early 20s, but I have been around a long time, because I did start this when I was 2. No, and again, so many times, perhaps what might be deemed a new method comes out. I remember, face-to-face fundraising on the street. You know, many people talked about chuggers, and people said, "We're not going to do that. We're not doing it. Definitely not. I would never give that way." And I personally, I just thought, because it was at the time when this was getting really big, was when there was, all sorts of fraud. I've lost track of all my PIN numbers, because this is when all the banks said, oh, you can't give your bank details. And you met somebody in the street, they have this clipboard, filling it in. Can you put all your bank details? And I'm just thinking, why on earth would people do that? Next thing is that, and I'm not implying anything, please don't anyone can get me wrong out there. Obviously, everyone's trustworthy, but you're almost doing what all the banks were saying, to protect yourself against fraud, never give your bank details to anyone, yet you were doing it freely, or whatever. And obviously that pivoted, that changed, because they started to realize, we need another way to deal with this. But just because I don't like something, and I'm using me in this case, doesn't mean it won't work. And what we need to do is, and it's a good thing, I'm always encouraging people who I'm involved when I'm training or when I'm doing interim management, and we're perhaps working on strategy with people, is sometimes you say, stop wearing your shoes. Or you might want to say, stop wearing your hat. You cannot just sit representing yourself. What you've got to do is imagine the supporters of the charity currently. What do they like? What do they want to do? But also then, if we're looking to attract new supporters, we can't, possibly we've tried something with our existing supporters. Think about my matrix that I had before, the ANSOF matrix. It's one of those middle risk areas. It was one of the ambers, an existing technique to a new audience. The new audience didn't like the existing technique. So if we want to get new audiences, sometimes we've got to change our technique. And again, that was also on the amber scale. So regardless of whether I like it, whether our head of services likes it, whether the finance director likes it, if we try it out, and that's my key thing, is pilot things, test it, but talk to people. And that's why I love the fact that people say, oh, we're talking to a lot more people. There's ways that people can react to it, to a survey or whatever. But again, people close to you, use them. What do you think about this? We're trying to get some younger supporters involved. So again, you might be talking to someone who's perhaps got children who are the age. So they might be quite good to know what their kids would like, but also how better to say to a volunteer, I'm just thinking the new target for this particular activity would be children who are similar age to those of yours who have just left home or whatever. Is this the sort of thing that they will like? But do their mum and dad actually know? So I actually say, I'd love the chance to talk to your kids. Could they drop in? Can I have a phone call? And actually talk to who is your potential audience. So stop thinking, what do I like? And again, it's a great excuse to ignore everyone else in the organisation who says, oh, no, I wouldn't like that. I wouldn't do that. But are they the typical audience? Now, I find myself over time, as I have been around a while, I am now a typical legator in terms of the audience. I'm certainly not there, but something I read the other day, apparently we're so busy trying to encourage people to write a will, but it's a known fact that anyone over 60 who's likely to be including the charity in their will, they're into planning, they've probably got a will, they've thought about the benefits of having a will, and they've thought or the right to actually update it to include a charity they now want to give some money to when they're no longer here. So we need to think about who is our audience. And so tell that you're not our target audience. So I'm not surprised. And I don't mean to do it in an aggressive or an assertive or a confrontational way, but it's about just thinking, who is the audience this activity is aimed at? Will they like it? And ignore the other stuff that's going on around it. And then try it out, pilot it, test it, so you're reducing that risk. And then you can then roll it out bigger and then prove everybody else wrong. It's fine. It wasn't aimed at you. You know, you're a 45-year-old who's got this background or whatever, but this was actually aimed at getting 18 to 24-year-olds involved. Hope that, I know it might have been a bit of a longer, but I'm trying to give fuller answers that perhaps actually help answer other points or give other people additional information.
No, brilliant, really full. Thanks very much, Jill. Two more so that we finish on time. So the first, you might redirect, quick question, complex. So where do you include a capital appeal in your fundraising plan? It's looking for a new building.
Sorry, just repeat that again.
Where do you include a capital appeal within your fundraising plan? Looking to fund a new building.
Absolutely.
Looking to fund a new building. So quick one on that, and then I'll give you a very quick summary one to go with.
I'm watching the clock. We've still got a few minutes, so we're okay. Now, interesting one about the capital. Capital appeals still are going on at the moment, but quite a lot of capital appeals have actually stopped. When the COVID pandemic hit, I was actually an interim appeal director on running a capital project. It was going great. We got 65% to target, and I definitely knew where we were going. And I was actually anticipating us hitting targets sooner than we needed to, which was great news. We got some really good plans in place and some good contacts, and we got a great number of really influential meetings set up with influential people who were going to, through their companies, their personal pot or their trust, be able to actually support us. And so that though got put on hold, and that now has actually been scaled back because it was a refurbishment and extension, and that charity has decided they've had a hit on their income. So their normal revenue income was running in parallel to the capital appeal, and I will just come back to explain about that in a minute. And so what they have decided is just to do the refurbishment, because they are desperate to do the refurbishment. And so they're saying is we don't feel we can take on the extra revenue that the extension will then mean our running costs are increased. So they said we need to get back to the level we're at before we can even start to think about expanding. So a capital appeal is something that you never, ever just wake up one morning and say, right, I'm going to do a capital appeal. You've got to have a reason for the expansion or the new build or the elements that are forming what is your capital project. And you need to think about it in advance, because one of the big impacts with the capital appeal is it does impact on your revenue fundraising. So you need to ramp that up before you start your capital appeal so that you're actually ready, because it's what we call cannibalization of income. Because once you actually start and you go public, is that people somehow, an organisation, I don't want to give to your running costs, I want to give to this nice, bright, new, shiny thing. And it seems to be like magpies, they want to go to that shiny thing. And so some of your existing, you could almost say, still no guarantees, but, perhaps you've had, the round table is various other organisations, perhaps a regular funder all of a sudden, yes. So what you want to do is ramp up your existing fundraising before. So it is a part of your overall long-term strategy. It's part of your long-term business plan. And so you're planning in advance. So your fundraising, you say, needs to ramp up. Then you need to run things in parallel. And what is often referred to, and I don't really want to get too technical, but there are a number of phases to a capital appeal. There's the planning phase, which is about putting all the right foundations and planning what you're going to do. You then go into what is known as either the private, the silent, or the quiet phase. It's not about having the thermometer outside the church hall or anything at that point. What you do is start to raise money, because if an appeal goes on for an awful long time, people lose heart, they get disinterested. And some people like to come in early and think their money can be a magnet. It's almost like that match funding. So I'll give this and then it'll help release some match funding. and others like to come in at the end. But you don't go public too soon, because I think when you go public, it's people who are running the coffee mornings. They are going to do a 5K for you. But those are lots of smaller amounts of money. So the way that you split up a target, you want some, what we often call lead gifts, big gifts, and then some smaller gifts. So you'd aim to get, if you've got it in a pyramid, you'd have you perhaps the top 2/3 of it in your private phase, and then you go public. And then that is the danger time when people start to, instead of giving money to your normal revenue things, say, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do my coffee morning, I'm going to do Christmas tree recycle or whatever it is, and it's going in to the other pot of money. So again, you need to be ready for that. And again, it's then appealing to people and organisations in your private phase saying, can you do something extra for us, rather than can you actually, can you support us and say, yeah, I want it to go to the nice bright shiny new thing. It's about asking people to go that extra mile because we've got this special thing on. And it's an important phase, because if you are in a community and you want that community to actually help you run the thing in the future, they need ownership. And that's why if they've contributed to it, then they want to see this thing carry on. And so they've got an investment into it for the future. So that's how you run a capital appeal in 2 seconds. In a nutshell. But I hope so again, just think really carefully. Is it something that the need is really there now to do it, but have you actually done your planning? So even though everyone's desperate, the minute you start on a capital appeal, people, you pass and they say, oh, how much money have you got in today, Jill? And you say, no, so it's about managing expectations. When you start a capital appeal, you've got that planning phase. So there's nothing stopping people starting the planning phase and then deciding, have you been able to identify enough potential supporters, funders, donors, whatever, we often talk about them then as prospects. Have you been able to identify enough prospects that you can then start to approach? And that takes time, and that's the planning phase. If you start your fundraising too soon, you might get a big sharp increase of income, but then it plateaus and you think, how do I get past this? So again, that planning phase is absolutely vital, just as a plan for your overall fundraising. So initially, you need to think in advance, ramp up your normal everyday fundraising, and then run it in parallel. So you've got 2 plans, but then sometimes there's discussions about, is revenue having that? Is the capital appeal going to have that? So sometimes there's difficult decisions to make. But knowing about it well in advance is useful, because there are some funders out there who now don't let you reapply for 5 years. So there's nothing worse, and that happened to me. When I look back, I knew of a funder and I thought, yes, we fit lovely into that funder's criteria. And I found out that the charity had £15,000 donation from them, which sounds good, but I was actually earmarking them for £250,000. But because we'd had that 18 months ago, we couldn't go back for 5 years. And again, no one had told the trust fundraiser, just hold off on some things because we're going to have a capital appeal in perhaps 2-3 years, and possibly they wouldn't have made that approach. But you say that's where it's about running them, and that's why it's part of a long-term strategy.
Just brilliant. Thanks so much, Jill. I challenge anyone who hasn't got at least one note to take away from the webinar. There's a couple of questions on there about engaging corporate fundraisers. We'll be getting to them in future webinars. Please look out on the Ecclesiastical website. But I'll hand over to you, Jill, to wrap things up. And I think we're out of time for questions, are we?
Well, I think we've time for one more. Go on.
What seems okay. One more. Well. It sort of takes you back to the beginning, and I've picked it up because people come on a session like this to think, oh, I'm overwhelmed, where do I start? So it's back to that. When I go on a training session or something, what's my starting point? And someone said, I know this is a simple question, but where do you practically begin? I'm struggling to actually begin. Do I gather data on the donations? Do I go to sources? Where do I practically begin? And you can feel the overwhelm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll leave you with that one.
Well, in fact, I did a training yesterday on community fundraising, and they were all new community fundraisers, and I feel for them because They told the communities out there, go to it. And that is exactly what we do to begin with. We actually narrow it down. What is that community? Because again, I can feel there's panic in people. And having been there myself, I started life as a community fundraiser and just thinking, well, where do I start? And again, just think, well, and go back, use the Ansoff matrix that I shared before. That's a really good thing to use. Which was, the new, the existing techniques to the existing audience, but use that alongside thinking, where are we now? And so there is this period. Again, so many fundraisers, especially when they're new in a charity. And again, over the years, I ended up heading up one of the top 10 UK charities at one stage in terms of their income generation. And I know so many times a new fundraiser say, I'm feeling guilty. I've been here 2 months and I've not raised a penny yet. It's all right. You're on your induction. We're doing a training program. So to be honest, so you're more effective later on. But this is it. Don't think you've got to run out today and get some money in, because you might do it in a way that actually, just think of that example I just shared about that trust. They gave 15,000, but had the ability. You could have just killed them off and they could give you, $250,000. So as that planning process, where are we now? Where do we want to be? How are we going to get there? And then you implement. So you've got this period of time where you've got to think about it. So the first thing to do is, where are we now? What activities are we doing? What income sources are we tapping into? And what are the activities, or as I use the jargon, the real term, the tactics that we're using? See what's working, what's not working, what used to work last year. And I think for anyone at the moment, I would definitely look back to what happened, the previous year, as well as what's happening. Because, we are coming out of this. I know I'm the eternal optimist, I keep saying this. I know it's not for a while yet, but later on, I'm predicting, you've heard it here now, last quarter of next year, we will be doing some sort of mass getting together and mass participation fundraising events. But we're not going to be doing it till then, because there's a lot of nervousness out there. So look to see what's been working well the year before. So perhaps you can factor that in for Q4 next year or Q1 of 2022. Did I really say that? 2022? Yeah. So that we're sort of on this journey. So think about what's working. Where are we now? Where do we want to get to? And just thinking, what activities are we doing that can carry on in exactly the same format? What new opportunities are existing? And without sort of totally going into our next session, but there are new grant funds around. There are new trusts, or existing trusts are actually having new grant pots around. Some of those won't go on forever, and they will return to normal, I think, probably by spring next year, if they've not already done so by the end. It's almost like it's like that Extra Sketch thing, we want to wipe it all clean at the end of this year. Well, we're not quite there, but I think from a fundraising perspective, in terms of some of those grant funds, they're going to move away from the grant COVID specific. But I think some of them will have new programs representing the fact that you're on this recovery journey and you're changing. So going back to the question, where are we now? That's what you need to understand. How did we get to where we are? So not just think about the last 9 months, but also think perhaps about the last year before that. And then think, where do we want to go? Where do we want to be, and how we're going to get there? So use this time. Don't just think, I've got to start generating some money. And if trustees are saying, oh, well, you were employed this month and we expect money next month, just then think, what might be some quick wins that, looking back to see what you've done, you might already have some things. We're not saying you're stopping all your fundraising, because there's some things may already be in play that perhaps you need to tweak a little bit to make it work at the moment, or you can reinvent it perhaps in a virtual world. And I think that's our last session where we're talking about virtual worlds. Oh, I'm doing lots of promoting of the
well, I'm going to do a bit of a shameless promotion myself, actually, not even just about fundraising, but there's a number of questions that still head towards that. How do I gear, whether it's the whole organisation, the trustees, a particular staff group, how do I gear people towards sharing in the campaigns and the promotion? Directory of Social Change do run a course called Communicate with Influence, and that is my shameless promotion. But certainly a place where you can think about, how do I deal with getting a particular message or persuasion across to a particular group of people. Here's another one. You tell me when to stop, Jill.
Last one, but I'm going to make it quick. then we will
and
start winding up.
contextual, given the lack of face-to-face fundraising events this year, how effective do you think things like text donations and donation points where you can give via debit cards, you know, from a practical, should we be doing it now, but also within a strategic
Well,
picture?
again, there was some fabulous information, and I can't remember all the figures off the top of my head. But Donna, who runs a text to give service, and again, just if you're listening to this and that was your question, go back to the last webinar. I put some incredible information in there, and I say I can't just access it now. I'll probably shut myself off from this. But you know. It's back to something I made as a comment, sort of in passing before. And overall, as fundraisers, our job is to ask. And some people say, oh, I feel uncomfortable about that. Well, actually, what we need to do is find lots of different ways to ask. And some we will need to say to someone, whether it's an individual or someone who's representing an organisation, don't think, can you give us some money? Think, can you help us? That is one of the key things I actually think. I'm not ashamed to ever ask anyone, because if I'm involved with a charity, and again, I'm very fortunate, I will only work with charities I believe in, because there's times when I'm going to put my neck on the line, and there's times when I'm going to be saying to all the people close to me in the team in fundraising to say, you're going to have to ask them. And if you don't believe in what your organisation is doing and what it's achieving, if you don't know what you're doing and what you're achieving, find out before you start asking. So that's sometimes why you need a bit of time to induct. But be then confident when you actually are asked that their money, their support, their help is going to make a difference. So don't think I'm asking for money. Think, I want some help to solve this problem. And to do that problem solving, I need £10,000 or whatever. So that help translates into money, but you're actually asking for help first, and the money is how that help will actually be achieved. And my other, and I don't know if I shared it last time, but I'm going to share it again. And this is, it is how I think. And I am really, really serious about this, because sometimes people say, oh, you just say that. And I don't. This is how I think. If I don't ask, I'm actually denying people an opportunity to do something incredible. And that is, as fundraisers, I think I've been doing it, as I say, for 30 odd years. And I think my life, I've been so privileged for the career I chose, which wasn't my original choice. I fell into fundraising and thought I'd then go off and do something else. But then realized it was a great place to be. The things I've been able to do, the places, the people I've met have been incredible. The things I never thought I'd ever happen. But what I actually, bottom line, I am so proud that over my career and all of my voluntary as well as professional fundraising, I've given people an opportunity to do something incredible. Whatever the organisation, I've got to believe in it, because they've got to be doing something incredible. And so if I don't ask, I'm actually denying people that chance. And why should I do that? So that's why I am more than happy to ask. But I won't just go asking out today. I would need to understand the organisation. I would need to know what the money is going to achieve, and definitely how a gift can make a difference. And then I can share that with people, and they can be part of a solution. And that, to me, is the bottom line on fundraising. Never be embarrassed, because if you believe in what you're doing, you're not asking them to give to you. Yes, you might be the conduit. You might be giving them the website address or the bank account, or even holding, you know, that contactless thing so they can put their card against it and £5 is going to be taken. But just remember, every time as a fundraiser, we are in a unique and privileged position. We are connecting. We're just a conduit. Don't make ourselves pig in the middle. Try and connect donors, supporters, funders to the difference they're making. Don't say, give us the money and we'll do something incredible. It's a mindset. And I think I definitely did share this last time, but I'll keep sharing it, because it is a mindset. They're not giving money to you. You are just the conduit. Connect them to the solution, connect them to the beneficiaries, because they are changing people's lives. They are making a difference. It's not us. We are just the conduit. And on that final point, because I did constantly say about, we need to look after our donors, our supporters. We don't just ask them, we thank them, we then update them, we then inform them, and then we find the right opportunity to ask them again. But again, so often we thank them for their generosity. Are we thanking them for their generosity? Are we thanking them for their kindness? We're thanking them for their generous gifts. So again, just there's a lot of wordplay and a lot of psychology going on in fundraising, and that is actually where my background is as well. It's in psychology. So we need to think about what we're doing, how we're saying it, and sometimes just that slight change from one word to another can make a huge difference. Your donation will help us to change people's lives instead of your gift will change people's lives. Take ourselves out of it. So I hope that's given lots of people some thought. We are actually just a couple of minutes to go. So I'm just going to thank you, Kathy, for helping. I just couldn't read all the questions and be able to answer them.